Okay, so now we're in the full
Yes.
self-conscious
Yes.
era of Wall Street consensus, and de-risking is a good thing. De-risking becomes even the proper way of doing good while doing well, right?
Yeah.
And you can see that it's even taken up by private finance. I mean, that's when Larry Fink and BlackRock comes to full prominence by saying that, you know, we're in the business of saving the world and transforming the world too, in partnership with government. But you also have, when then de-risking is in full bloom, you still have what could be called a variety of de-risking regime, just like, you know, we talked about variety of capitalism. So, for instance, de-risking in the European Union is not exactly the same as what de-risking will be with Bidenomics, which is not the same thing as what de-risking is imagined to produce in the global south. So quickly on the variety of these de-risking regimes.
Of course, yes, you're right that the modes and practices of de-risking, which is a kind of umbrella term for relationships between the state and capital, and financial capital in particular. These modes vary according to national or whatever regional characteristics, and they also vary to some extent. They also change, I would say, historically, as the kind of grip of the neoliberal logic weakens over time, right? And you could say, well, has the grip of neoliberal logic weakened over time? For somebody like me who's an economist, I would say yes, because de-risking first emerges as a project to finance and produce infrastructure in international development in 2015. It in parallel emerges as a project to finance the climate transition in the European Union in 2015. And then it moves towards industrial policy once the Biden administration basically says neoliberalism is in the past. We have to do industrial policy, both because it's a way to restore the American middle class dreams, and it's a way for us to fight China. So you're right that de-risking changes historically, both with specific country political processes, but it also changes globally as its reach changes as the neoliberal grip on politicians and the political imaginary weakens over time. And the way that I would describe some of the differences in those kinds of practices of de-risking is that it certainly starts in international development as a project for countries in the global south. And BlackRock is not there yet. In 2015, if you look, for example, the one interesting way or fascinating way to kind of trace the actors in de-risking is to look at the IMF World Bank spring and annual meetings, where you will have, you know, it's a kind of ritual where besides engaging civil society organizations or ministers of finance and governors of central banks meeting, the World Bank produces a series of panels through which it pushes its specific ideological project and its specific direction for travel through these panels. And in 2015, when I would say it marks the official beginning of the transformative de-risking and the Wall Street consensus, in 2015 you have a panel on infrastructure investment, on how to make infrastructure investable, and the representative of financial capital is not actually somebody from Wall Street. It's a French asset manager, a private equity firm called Meridiam, and his boss, the boss of this company called Thierry Dault, who is very close to Macron, and we will kind of pop up in various Macron administrations in various photos after that. He's on the stage with a minister of infrastructure, I think, or minister of finance from Peru, because the meeting takes place in Peru, and with somebody from the World Bank, with a moderator from the Financial Times, and with another minister from, I think, Côte d'Ivoire, a minister of finance from Côte d'Ivoire.
What year is that?
2015. And so this is a panel. It's like an hour and a half panel, and the question is, how do we make infrastructure investable? And it's a fascinating panel because the answer that Thierry Daud provides, that this financier provides, is to say, well, the government has to take some risks. I'm happy to invest in infrastructure. I'm happy to go to Côte d'Ivoire, or I'm happy to go to Peru and build hospitals and manage hospitals on behalf of or for the government or on behalf of citizens, but the government has to take some risks. And the Financial Times moderator responds, well, aren't you proposing a public-private partnership like the ones that we have in the UK that were so bad for the public purse that we stopped doing them? Aren't there any risks? And the answer from both ministers and from the financier, from Thierry Daud, is, of course, the distributions of risk between the private sector and the state in this investability or in making infrastructure bankable. The distributions of risks can be exposed to a certain, let's say, excess, as in it gives excessive benefits to the private sector, excessive costs to the public sector. But this is a question of transparency. This is not a problem. Nobody says with the idea of investable infrastructure, we are privatizing every kind of public good. And that's where the neoliberal logic continues. The transformative de-risking project in infrastructure is a project of privatizing social and other kinds of infrastructure. But nobody talks about this because for politicians, the question is, I can't build a hospital, or the problem is I can't build a hospital. Thierry Daud and Meridiam will build this hospital for me. They have the money, they have the trillions, we can put it in there as long as I take some risks. And I'm writing this book on the Wall Street Consensus, and in the chapter where I trace the rise of the Wall Street Consensus in international development, I look at the ways in which Thierry Daud and Meridiam basically kind of took over the construction of public-private hospitals in Turkey. And this was one of the most expensive, for the Turkish state, it was one of the most expensive ways of building private hospitals or allowing private finance to run hospitals for you. It ended up costing around 40% of GDP in fiscal costs. It was such a big cost. And it had many implications for Erdogan, including the kind of social mobilization that he had to accommodate and that pushed him to withdraw a bit from the neoliberal / Wall Street Consensus agenda that he had earlier. And now Turkey doesn't do PPPs in hospitals anymore because of the excessive cost that Thierry Daud and Meridiam kind of managed to, or excessive profits that they managed to extract. So
which means that they now invest public money in hospital, or just they don't do hospital at all?
No, now it's a public money. They are back to public investment, because that's the fundamental. I mean, to be clear, what the Wall Street Consensus says is there is not enough public money. It doesn't diagnose the absence of public money as a problem of the distributional politics of neoliberalism, where you don't tax corporations properly, where you let where you let high net worth individuals or the very rich to move money around in a way that basically arbitrages any significant tax regime that you want to impose of them, where you privatize your pay-as-you-go pensions and create these large pools of capital that then you give to financiers to build your infrastructure. The Wall Street Consensus never considers this. It takes as a starting point that there are limited fiscal resources, you can't get more of them. What you can do is redirect some of them towards de-risking, right? So, yes, I would say the alternative of public investment is always, although the state is supposed to be back, it's always viewed as either unfeasible on its terms or really undesirable because, the public sector, neoliberalism tells us, cannot run things properly.